Writing in the Daily Maverick, Mervyn Bennun attacks South African Jews. In a rambling article, he attempts to redefine our history and incorrectly portrays us as intolerant, racist, and he also accuses us of attempting to stifle debate by maliciously playing the anti Semitism card. There is so much wrong with this article that it's hard to know where to begin. But let me start by introducing myself and my guest. I'm Charisse Zeifert, Deputy Director of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, and my guest is Glen Heneck, lawyer by trade, businessman by practice, occasional op-ed writer, and Vice Chair of the SHABD Cape Council. Glen, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Charisse. Nice of you to have me. Hope I do justice to the issue you're trying to address.
So in this series, Glen, we look at articles that appear in the mainstream media that misrepresent Jews, Zionism, and Israel. So in this piece, Bennun notes the following, and I quote, "Zionism urges on us what is forbidden. Defeating Zionism in South Africa is therefore a task we have to discharge. Zionism is an enemy from our past and attempting to haunt our present." End of quote. Glen, what do you make of this statement?
I think it's inelegantly worded and slightly curious to me. I'm not sure I entirely understand it. And I think I say that in the context of an article which generally was fairly clumsily written. But I just want to start by saying that it has long been, I call it a hobby horse of mine or a preoccupation of mine, that there are Jewish people who take up fairly stridently anti-Israel positions in the media. Some of them do it well, some of them do it less well. I say Mr. Bennun's probably fits into the doing less well category. But they write articles, and the articles, I think, are potentially surpassingly destructive certainly for Israel, possibly for Jewry, and even possibly for the future of the world. So with this kind of inbuilt credibility of being perceived to be or understood to be a member of the other side of the conflict or the contest, the people who write them will be presumed to be by people who are looking at it objectively. Well, they're on that side. The fact that they're making common cause with the other side must mean that the antagonists, in this case the Israelis, are miserable reprobates who deserve all they have coming to them and all the death and disaster that's been heaped on them. I think that's been a huge problem for me. I'm not saying it's driven by anti-Semitism. I'm not saying it's driven by any kind of like really bad human instinct. I think there's a lot of self-righteousness in it. I think there's a kind of a natural leftism in it, and that's the thing I'll get into in a minute when I speak about the specifics. But I just wanted to make the point about the innate harm that can be done by these articles, in that there's every likelihood that they would engender in a region that's already suffering an extraordinary amount of antipathy, mutual antipathy, and travail. You throw into the brew an article by somebody who ostensibly represents one side, saying that his own side is behaving surpassingly badly. It's virtually an invitation to violence. I've always thought that, and it's always concerned me considerably. I don't like. I consider myself politically left-leaning. I'm sympathetic to, I dare say, to quite a lot of the things that Mr. Bennun would like to see. The end of the settlements and a sovereign Palestinian state with security guarantees and even reparations. But I think that he gets some things woefully wrong in this article. I think that people from his cohort, I want to call them the hard left, they share his illusions regarding the situation on the ground and the moral, philosophical merits. And I think they're doing the opposite. So that all said, the thing about what Bennun says there about Israel, elsewhere in the article, he talks about the following. He says, the Zionist poison that it is anti-Semitic to criticize Israel in its form as a racist ethno-national state must also be confronted at home. I think that I'm going to try and deal with the two passages together. Essentially saying the same thing. He's saying that if we are self-respecting constitution honoring, decent South Africans who invest in the South African project, we've got to reject Zionism as a thing. Now, I mean, you Charisse, will be astute to this. There's a sub-community within the Jewish community in South Africa, in the diaspora generally, or let's call it, I won't get into the detail, it will take too long, but uncomfortable with the incumbent government, uncomfortable with the settlements, uncomfortable with various things that are done by the Israeli state, and happy to articulate, comfortable articulating that discomfort. Mick Davis did it last week, a kind of celebrated conservative Englishman. There are a lot of people who are uncomfortable with certain things that are done, but they do not deny the right of Israel to exist as a majority Jewish state. That is my position. And I think that's what Mr. Bennun gets wrong. And in a way, it's very helpful to all of us. Mr. Bennun gets, he says that to be a supporter of Israel as a Jewish state is a per se offense against the kind of morality that he thinks he embodies and he thinks should prevail universally. Now, I get that. I'm quite a lot older than you, but I mean, I grew up in the 70s and 80s in South Africa where non-racialism was like a kind of a panacea or the kind of the holy grail. I'm still pretty invested in that as a long-term project. In fact, I'm fully invested in it. I think it's a wonderful ideal. But the fact of the matter is that the non-racial ideal can only properly be honored in a borderless world. The world that we actually been brought up in and exist in today is a world where national borders are the default. There are 220 or 230 countries. Some of them, Israel is an exemplar. Some of them are defined in their constitution. Israel doesn't have a constitution, as you know, but some of them are defined by their ethno-national character. And that's true of the Israeli state. It's a Jewish state. But the other countries and like you could go there, they're literally almost all of them. Any state that is a nation state actually falls to be tarred with the same brush if you think it's a tarring, or described with the same descriptor if you think it's just a neutral description of what actually is. France, Germany. France is for the French. Germany is for the Germans. England for the English. And then came colonialism, and then they took over the third world, and they drew the Europeans drew these random borders in Africa, and people found themselves, and they did in the Middle East, they did in South America, and you end up with a world with actually two kinds of countries. There are countries that make sense, and there are countries that make little sense. Israel happens to make sense ethnologically, and in terms of let's call it essentialized group identity, and other countries make very little sense. I don't want to get into South Africa here now. But basically, it's almost like my challenge to Mr. Bennun. And it's something that we actually need to explore. And I think in Cyril and President Ramaphosa's national dialogue, it's going to have to be explored at least at some level. You've got a situation where you've got this thing called a nation state. It was developed from Westphalia in the 17th century through the German and French or the German-Italian unification. You come up with these lots of nation states that make sense, and then nation states that don't make sense. Mervyn Bennun and most people, in fact, I'd say university, people on the left, have got this view somehow that Israel is a per se racist project. That's why I picked up that passage, the other passage, which, the one you referred to, I read that article too, and the one I picked up said, it's a racist ethno-national state. That's either a tautology or it's just I think it's both a tautology and misconceived. I do not believe that Israel is an inherently racist country, but I do believe that Israel is premised on the idea of a certain kind of, call it loyalty, certain kind of tribal identity, certain kind of urge on the part of human beings to cohere, to form communities and to live their lives accordingly. Nassim Taleb, you probably know this, a very well-known, I think fairly progressive philosopher, sociologist, said the following. He said, apartheid, the nation state, is apartheid without the political incorrectness. And I think he got at something essentially true, namely that any country which has got a predominance of a certain language group, cultural group, ethnic group, is by definition an ethno-state. They masquerade, they all do it, all the countries in the world masquerade or was affect to be universalistic and non-racial. And I mean, Israel does it to a fault in some way. Get back to Mr. Bennun, I think he got it wrong, and I think the article is very toxic and potentially very destructive. And I wish he'd walk it back, which he obviously won't. And I think that this kind of criticism really needs to be called out in an aggressive way.
Glen, I think for me, what's so problematic, I've been working in the Jewish community for two decades, and you sit on the Cape Council, the vice chair actually of the Cape Council of the Jewish Board of Deputies. And I'm pretty sure that the Jews he describes in these articles may or may not exist, but to kind of tar our community with one brush, calling each of us, when we all know it's an extremely heterogeneous community, that we have lots of different opinions on lots of different things, and to kind of tar us and define us all as racist seems particularly offensive.
I fully agree with you. The idea that a Jewish community can be of one mind on any one issue is preposterous. Anyone knows a Jew. Certainly, I think your audience is mainly Jewish, but there's a famous Roman saying, "Quod homines tot sententiae," 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Well, there's a litany of ways of describing what you've just described, and I think it's completely true. He's got that utterly wrong, and he knows he's got it wrong. He exemplifies the fact that he's wrong. He hasn't been taken down. He hasn't been, as far as I know, I promise you, there's no way that Mervyn Bennun ever goes to bed at night thinking, "Oh my God, the Jews are going to come in. They're going to come and take me out," or they're going to come and draw like some kind of horrible swastika thing, or whatever it is, whatever the correlate of the swastika would be on my wall at home. That's not going to happen. He just, he goes about his business and he says what he wants to say. I think again, and I want to amplify this point, I think again that the fact that he does it is more. It's likely. You asked me just before we came on, if you call it come on air. You asked me, do you think this article encourages violence? I don't think it does. I think I met Mervyn Bennun. He seems a nice enough guy. I don't think he wants violence. He wants change, profound change, but he doesn't want violence. But I do believe, and this is what I almost beg him to think about, him and his whole cohort. Think about it next time you say Israel is an apartheid, genocidal, ethno-disgusting state, how that plays in the mind of somebody who's a kind of borderline, call it what it is, suicide bomber, thinks, you know what, even those guys, they think that this Israeli state is like this revolting. I mean, I say again, I've got problems with what Israel is doing. I wish there was a ceasefire tomorrow. But to go and denounce the Israeli state as genocide is actually, it is an invitation to people of good conscience to do whatever they can to bring it to its knees, and that would naturally include violence. So maybe the right answer to your question is that it is actually conducive, certainly conducive to violence, but I don't think it's an actual exhortation to commit violence.